fun has always been a huge part of our relationship. I always say she married me for 2 reasons. 1, because I'm brutally handsome, and 2, because I was funny. So one of those is not true. So I have to keep the funny thing up. I got to keep that game going.
Welcome to the Focus on the Family broadcast, helping families thrive.
Hey, welcome, Ted and Nancy, to Focus on the Family.
Well, thanks for having us.
Now,
Exactly.
Nancy, you're
Thank
not
you.
the co-author here, so I got to
No.
ask you, is it as easy as Ted makes it out to be?
Sure. He did let me read it as he's going and saying, "Is this true?
Did
Is
you
this
edit?
true?" No. But he did want to be authentic, and I said, "Yes, this is true, and these are things we've really actually done."
Yeah, and that's a good thing. And I love, Ted, what you've done here with that subtitle, particularly, Marriage is Easier Than You Think. We do tend to make it difficult. Why?
I think we've been convinced that a group of PhDs, which are great, have the answers to marriage, and somehow the average Joe and Sue have to extract those answers, right? And I've had many friends that are counselors and psychologists who say, we've just forgotten a lot of the basics, like being kind. And so I've been working with married couples for a long time, and I worked at a church for 10 years, and we would have these events once a quarter, and we would just talk about one thing. We don't have to walk away with just one thing. And so we would always do that out of God's Word, and the whole night would be based on that. And I kept hearing myself say over and over, this may not be easy necessarily to live out, but it is easy to understand. I thought, why would God make the gospel, really, really complicated and make marriage complicated? God's made the gospel clear, and how we love each other is clear.
Being kind is it's the self-control and dying to self, because sometimes I don't want to be kind, and I don't want to blow that off. I want to say something snarky, but I don't, because I'm just trying to be kind in
But the
this
key
moment.
there is you have to make that choice.
It is a
And how
total
have you
choice.
found the tool to be able to do that? Speak to the wives that are
Jesus.
listening. Yeah. But what
Jesus.
does that mean practically when you're upset at your husband and something is irritating you and he's not aware of it, and that makes you even more upset?
He
and
should know.
My goodness, why doesn't he know? That irritates me. And what do you do as a mechanism to back up and say, okay, I'm not going to let my flesh have the victory here. I'm going to do what the Lord would want me to do.
I think before we just used to let it go, and it would get ugly. And I think we just got tired of that, to go, why? It just gets so gross and ugly.
Why are we treating each other like
Yes,
this?
why
That's a good
are we
starting
let
point.
it escalate to that, where it is just yuck? And so I think we made micro moves back. I don't think it was just some big revelation one day of being a little kinder, a little more gentle with our words, and then just watching how we responded to each other. And it's just evolved into, I think, a general sweetness and kindness most days.
Yeah, and that's somewhat trained. For the benefit of the listener, let's roll the clock back. Let's talk about how you met and how you got married and kind of that background, because many people will connect with your story because you're, if I say this in the most complimentary way, typical. You fell in love. You were attracted to each other. Talk about those days, and then getting married and looking the other way with these things, and then eventually the irritations pile up.
Yeah, so we dated for like 6 weeks.
Right.
And decided we were going to get married, and then I moved across the country. We were living in Alabama at the time, and I moved to California. And so we don't tell singles our story a lot because we don't want them to emulate that you need to decide to get married after 6 weeks. So
God works in mysterious ways.
he certainly does. And we thought we were the special couple, that we were going to have no issues whatsoever. We kind of felt sorry for everybody else because they didn't have what we had. We had some older couples going, you need to watch out for this. This could be a problem. We're like, I feel sorry for them. Because that's never going to happen.
Right.
And then we got married, and wow, but we look back and we felt like we were having like these great moments of awesome mixed with these moments of awful. And I couldn't figure out how those two things worked out, because we would have some great moments.
Absolutely.
We loved hanging out. We were really close to the beach. It was great. But then we had all these moments that were awful. We get in these silly fights that, I always say silly fights can cause serious damage, right? And so we were, like Nancie said, we just let it go. And by let it go, not like, hey, we're not going to talk about it. Like, let it go. We're just going to say what we want to say. And so I think what we've learned is is to pull that back. But we learned kind of the hard way. God put some great couples in our life to kind of show us the way. We always say we don't have an excuse to have a bad marriage because we've always been surrounded by great people that's doing marriage well. And so God allowed us to be exposed to some great stuff, and it changed us.
Yeah, Ted, in that context, though, you could be surrounded by great people, but you don't listen to them.
Absolutely.
So how do you keep your heart open to those great words of wisdom when people say, hey, watch out?
You know, the thing that was amazing to me is we had been married about 4 years, and we started traveling with a big ministry that was doing events in arenas. And so they had every marriage guru in the country up on stage, and here we are fighting in the green room.
Oh,
gosh.
Right?
Those were good times. Good times.
I mean, if you could see a video of us in the beginning to now, and we're not perfect, but I would wish our marriage on anybody, and not because we're perfect, but because I feel like we've come so far, and we've just learned some pretty basic things, right, that change everything. So that's what we're passionate about, is going, okay, because people feel so flooded when their marriage is in trouble, right? They feel so flooded. They feel so confused. They feel like it's so complex. And a lot of times just these small, simple things can make a huge difference.
Now, Ted mentioned being, at a speaking event and you're fighting in the green room.
That would be one of those gross moments that it got ugly. And then we had to go on stage and be funny and charming and
Yeah.
act like we liked each other.
Because we weren't speaking about marriage. We were doing scenes of conflict, which we were
We
great
were
at.
so good.
Practicing. Yeah.
That's
So
so
good.
real.
Because they weren't so much acted as reality?
Maybe a little bit.
Yeah,
Maybe a little.
that's-
Maybe a little close to reality.
But I think people connect with that. I mean, one of the difficulties we have, particularly in Christian leadership, is those other people on the stage may have been going through the very same things you were going, but they hit it better. So why do we do that? Especially as Christians, why do we try to project perfection when brokenness is what draws people to the cross?
I remember one time when Ted was speaking when he was working at the church and one of these marriage events, and we've always, I don't even know if we had a discussion about it, but he's always been transparent, and we always have, about just struggles and all. And I remember someone came up to me after it and was like, I can't believe you let him tell stuff like that. And I'm like,
I've never heard that before.
Why wouldn't I? I mean, like, what's the benefit to me or to anybody else for us to hold our negative stories to ourselves? I mean, it serves no purpose. I feel like,
well, especially if you can learn from them, and others
Yes.
around you learn from them. I think that's the context in which that should be
Right.
shared. In the book, Your Best Us, you mention these areas of conflict. In your early marriage, you tended to lean on humor. Did the humor cover things up, or was it an important part of making it better?
I don't think we use humor to cover up. I think we use humor to rescue ourselves sometimes.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah, it was kind of repair attempts. John
Oh,
Gottman talks about repair
completely.
attempts, and so we would start laughing, or we'd make fun of the last fight. Fun has always been a huge part of our relationship. I always say she married me for two reasons: one, because I'm brutally handsome, and two, because I was funny. So one of those is not true. So I have to keep the funny thing up. I got to keep that game going.
oh, and he still tells stories that he's told since.
He still makes you laugh.
Yes,
And that's important.
since we were first married, and I'll go, oh, please tell that again.
How critical is that, to have humor in your relationship?
I think it's huge. It's the joy. It's what we had when we were dating. It's what drew us together. I mean, no one says when they're dating, oh, Dad, I just met the most amazing girl and she's completely passive aggressive. I can't wait to get together to work that out. They got together because they loved being together and having fun. So just to continue that, because sometimes couples stop that. And so I think it's huge. It's what brings joy into the day, because
Keeps it light.
Yeah.
What about in terms of temperament and wiring? What if two, and forgive me, engineers have senses of humor, I get that, but just for illustration's sake, what if two engineers are married and there's just not a lot of expressive humor in that relationship?
Well, the reason we called the book Your Best Us is because I feel like a lot of times as Christian leaders, we'll paint this picture perfect pedestal couple.
Right.
And we want everybody to aspire to be like that. And I think God's way more creative than that. I think he's painting different stories. Every marriage is completely unique. And so we encourage couples, don't be a version of someone else. Just be your best us. That's where that came from. And engineers may have engineering humor. Like for them, that's funny to them. It doesn't have to be funny to anybody else but the two of them. But I think the thing is, what are you doing to keep joy in your relationship? What are you doing to keep it light? Are you smiling at each other? Like what are those things? You know, we take things so seriously. We think we have first world problems a lot.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about all these things being so difficult, and we're like, oh, wait a minute, that was total first world problem, and then we'll laugh and move on. But I think it's key.
How do we in our marriages, how do we stay away from the complaining trap like that? First world problems, you know, and you're just complaining to one another. Sometimes about each other, other times about your circumstances.
I think that phrase for us has been the thing. That phrase has stopped us in our tracks many times. It's been more helpful for us probably in the complaining space than anything because it sounds so silly coming out of your mouth and if you ever travel outside the country, you try to keep those memories in your mind to go, don't say that I'm frustrated because the wireless doesn't work in the far end of our house. Right? That's crazy.
Yeah, what are those triggers for you? Give us an example in your marriage.
Of complaining. And I think, too, having teenagers makes you aware of when, maybe makes you aware of when they complain of how silly things sound. We say this a lot. We've grown up a lot, haven't we? And we grew up
since we were 17.
Since we've been married. I mean, I just think back in those early years of just not being grown up yet, and maybe it didn't hit till 40, but like to go, oh, we've grown up, and just what's important. What is that silly to complain about? It sure is. Maybe when we first married, we would have complained about it or gotten our feelings hurt or made a big deal about it. But that's a line we use a lot. Wow, we've grown up, haven't we?
All right, let's get to it. You developed 4 key habits for couples who want to experience a strong and healthy marriage. Everybody just went, okay, what are they? They got their pen and paper down. They're ready to go. All right, number 1, serious fun, and we have definitely touched on that, the importance of humor. Love God first. I think fundamentally this is it. And sometimes our experiences become lax. Our habits become lax. Praying together, reading together. It's true for Gene and me. Sometimes we just go through seasons where we're busy, and it's a terrible excuse. But speak to that issue of keeping God first, and how do you do that?
Yeah, one of the things I think is a little bit of a paradigm shift in terms of what we've been teaching churches and leaders and couples is a lot of times people see their faith is impacted when only the two of them are praying together, doing devotionals together. For us, we feel like if you get along with God by yourself, if you become the best version of who God wants you to be by yourself, God makes us a spouse we can never be on our own. You know, what did Jesus say? You know, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, body, and mind, then love others. And I think there's something to be said about the order of those two things. That when I am filled up with who God wants me to be, I'm a spouse that I could never be before. I mean, the fruits of the Spirit describe a pretty great spouse. And so we feel like a lot of times couples are trying to get all these relational needs met from each other. And a lot of us are living in communities of 2. And so we're trying to get all these needs met by, what people used to get met in a village, but also only the needs that God can meet. There's a classic movie, Jerry Maguire, where he says, "You complete me." And I think a lot of people think that that's what marriage is supposed to be. And I think God did never design our spouse to complete us. He wants to complete us. And that won't fully happen till heaven.
Yeah, and it's well said. Nancie, from a woman's perspective, though, those needs are there. They're real, the emotional needs. And a lot of husbands struggle meeting those. How do you set your expectations in such a way that Ted can actually meet those expectations that you have for him? And, speak again to a woman's heart.
We laugh at our house. I have far fewer words than Ted does at home. He's more the talker. But I think I've seen the shift of him of just being careful with my heart. That we were talking this morning before we came, and that has just been the shift.
What does that look like for you? What
I
does that
think
mean?
the way he responds to me, even when I'm doing something that I'm sure is quite frustrating, even the way his facial expressions, there's not a roll of the eye. There's not a shake in the head.
How do you fight that desire to win, to be right, whatever it might be, when you could give a little smug look that proves your point? I mean, it's so human to do that. How do you overcome that?
Yeah, so I grew up in a very demonstrative family, and so people they loved each other hard, but they were also fight hard. And so it was just, everything was pretty dramatic, and there was lots of expressions, and I've watched how tender her heart is. She is very, very sensitive. Her mother talks about the fact that she is very, very sensitive, so I know that that she's just that little girl grown up, and I have to be so careful with her. You know, how do I fight it? I think it's back to spending time with God. I think it's back, having the Holy Spirit do things that I can't do out of my flesh, because my flesh wants to roll my eyes. My flesh goes, I'm right and she's wrong, right? And the Spirit of God in me says, you be careful with her heart, because I have entrusted you to her. And we have been through some really hard things where she has just served me so well. We've become closer than I ever dreamed that we could be, right? And how can I not be careful? The Bible doesn't have a lot of verses on marriage, but one of it's to men is, do not be harsh with your wife. And she said to me before, she goes, I don't like it when you use your work voice.
Oh, man.
Guilty.
Right?
That is good.
Right? Don't come home with work voice. And so I've had to learn, drop that at the door. And I've heard a man say one time that his wife said, I want you to talk to me like a woman and not a man. And so I think it's just those simple things to go, and this is why we're passionate about what we do. You can choose not to be harsh any longer with your wife.
Wow.
You can have those moments, absolutely. Go and apologize, say, I'm working on it, but people can choose how they treat each other. And that's the thing. People say, I just get so frustrated. I can't help from getting mad, but yet they have great control at work, great control with perfect strangers. I'm convinced a marriage that's in trouble right now, if they would treat each other as well as they do their coworkers, with that amount of respect, the way they listen, consideration, that their marriage would do a 180.
And you're touching on that very next thing, which is that love and respect component, which we've done a lot of broadcasts on. But I mean, that's true. A woman needs to feel loved, and generally, and that man needs to feel respected. And you're illustrating that. What about the power of the wedding vows? I mean, these are things we say, and often, unfortunately, we forget that commitment that we made before the Lord.
Right.
Why are the wedding vows and remembering them such a critical thing?
Solomon reminds us about, being intoxicated by the wife of your youth. We've heard that, and to go, wait a minute, you made a promise to this young lady. We married when she was 23 and I was 25. So we feel like now, wow, we were kids. But I still promised her in front of her family, in front of her friends, that they could trust me with her forever, and not... so many people say we've just changed. We're like, of course you have. I hope you have in this many years. But for us, we say marriage is not about the big day; it's about the everyday. In this country, last year we spent $72 billion in wedding ceremonies.
Oh my!
And
In 1 year.
In 1 year, that averages $30,000 per ceremony. And I broke the internet because I can't find one stat on what people actually spend on their marriage. And so we say it's not about the big day; it's about the everyday. It's about what we call micro moves, that marriage aren't made up of the grand gestures. They're not made up of great vacations. If that were the case, celebrities would have incredible marriages. They're about these little moments, these micro moments. And we say the combined total of micro moves equals the condition of your marriage.
Oh, I like that.
It's so true, and that's a good thing for us as married couples to remember, and for those that hope to be married someday. These are the right things to concentrate on. Ted, it seems that love and respect is one of the most difficult attributes to get down, because we fight so often in an ungodly way, or we discuss things in an ungodly way. Let's put it that way. If you don't fight, what is perhaps one of the greatest lessons we can learn in this area of love and respect?
Right. For us, we've created an exercise along with people way smarter than us to discover what are we really fighting about, because you're really not fighting about, that he got home 10 minutes late. You're really not fighting about the roll of the eye. You're talking about something deeper. You're talking about wounds. You're talking about things that trigger each other. And so one of the things that we've seen with the book that's been the most helpful is this: how do we take this cycle of love and respect when we're doing it wrong and start doing it right? And really that starts with discovering here's where we're really wounded, here's where our spouse is really wounded, and here's a different way to respond. And that, for us, has been massive.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the feeling, Nancie, you're saying that Ted really cherishes or guards your heart
Yes.
when he responds.
And
in a
I
healthy,
think it was just an understanding to go, why is she sensitive? Why is she responding that way when I didn't really say anything? Yeah.
Because our negative responses, mine would be to get defensive, and hers would be to withdraw. So the more she would withdraw, the more defensive that I would get. And in being defensive, I was communicating to her that she didn't measure up. And by her withdrawing, she was saying to me that I was defective. That was our woundedness.
Huh.
Because it's deeper than that. We brought those wounds into marriage. And that for us was so huge that I know that when I get defensive, one, I'm never going to win by getting defensive. I'm never going to win a fight by trying to win. But that's when I protect her heart, just to go, stop talking, Ted.
But in that regard, Nancie, you had to learn, I would think, so don't let me fill in the blanks, you fill them in, but you had to understand that. Ted somehow had to communicate that. You had to understand that so you wouldn't, in some ways, verbally attack him, so he would become defensive.
Right.
And start the cycle.
Right. We were trapped in the car, actually. I like to say that I'm not a marriage expert. I'm a marriage guinea pig. And so I was driving, we were trapped in the car, and he's like, I got some questions for you. And that's how it usually starts. And so he launches in, he's asking questions, and it evolved into this of where's the woundedness. And it was a calm moment. If we'd have been in a fight, it would have been horrible. But in that calm moment of nothing's on the table, we're just talking.
No energy.
No, it was just flat. It was easy to talk about. Yeah. And then the next time there was a fight, it played into my head of going, oh, when we were in that calm moment, this is what we were talking about. Yeah. This is, and now I'm feeling it now. I'm feeling it living out. Now what are you going to do?
Well, I could so relate to that because some things out of your control you can't be responsible for. I'm thinking of kids again in that marriage discussion when kids are doing things you don't want them to do, and the spouse is saying, hey, how come you didn't do this to prevent that behavior? And you're going, I don't think me doing that would have prevented that behavior because he's his own person.
Sure.
Right.
And he's responsible to God for that behavior, and I'm his dad, but, I can't own him. And you understand?
Sure.
Yes,
you've
absolutely.
played that out a few times?
Absolutely.
And I think that defensiveness, it does come up because you don't know what to do. And for men particularly, when we can't fix it, we're in trouble because now we feel inadequate. We feel like we're not up to the task, and we're in trouble.
That's another phrase that has saved a million fights at our house, as I would say to her, do you want me to fix this or fill this? And every woman listening right now is just going, oh, we know the answer. It's fill this, which to a man makes zero sense to me.
Right.
But for her, it makes perfect sense. Do you want me to fix this or fill this? Probably 95% of the time she'll say, fill this. And I'm just going to have to respect
What does that mean to fill it?
I think it's to be there, to listen, to say I'm sorry, and that, even I have to constantly fight the inclination to fix it. I mean, I am sitting there.
To give me the 3-point fix-it plan.
I'm going to save you. I think that's the good heart of a man is he really does want to rescue and save his wife and go there. And so I have to fight it the whole time. Internal dialogue for me is like, don't say what you want to say. Just, oh, I'm so sorry, which to a man makes no sense.
This is basic marital advice, and you've done a great job in your book, Your Best Us. And Nancie, I think you've provided great color commentary here.
Well, thank you.
As the
Thank
guinea
you.
pig of marriage, not the expert.
Yes.
But it's so refreshing to have both of you talk so openly about where you were at, where you've come from, and the lessons that you've learned.
Hey, I'm John Fuller, and thanks for watching. Get more info about Focus over here and more from our guests over there, and be sure to subscribe to our channel as well.